Welcome to the Not Even Wine with Dinner podcast. I'm your host, Kristen, and we are here to talk about all things life, love, loss, and liquor. So let's uncork the bottle and get this party started. Hello, everybody. This is Kristen, and welcome to episode 17 of Not Even Wine with Dinner. Episode 17, that's crazy. This is season 2. We're halfway through 2026, and we've already done 17 episodes of this podcast in total. That's not this year, that's in total, but that's still a lot, and that's still a bit crazy to me. Anyway, so welcome. Thank you guys for coming. If you've watched before, you will notice that I am sitting a little more relaxed because I am going to shift gears this week. And instead of sitting here with my notebook trying to teach you something or, share my thoughts and my wisdom, I am going to do some storytelling. And the reason I'm going to do that is because when I started this podcast, it was on the heels of my storytelling on the website medium.com. Some of my stories went semi-viral on that platform, and that was what sparked me to want to tell these stories verbally. And I feel like I got caught up a bit in, maybe more instructional or tutorial types of things. And that's probably because I was a longtime yoga instructor, which actually I still am. I shouldn't say was, but I was a longtime yoga instructor. And even in a lot of the jobs I had before, I have 30 plus years in retail and doing design work and management. And I did a lot of training. I did a lot of training courses, meaning I was a trainer. So that's kind of what I do. I like to teach people. I like to teach. So that comes very natural for me. However, I am also a storyteller. It's funny because now that I don't drink anymore, sometimes the storytelling gets a little more difficult because you don't have liquid courage behind you. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So what I wanted to do was just start off with, how does a kid start drinking and then turn into an addict? That's my story. That doesn't mean it's your story, and it doesn't mean that it's right, wrong, or good or bad. It's just my story. And I know through my sobriety journey and talking to a lot of other people that it resonated with a lot of people. There are many people who just assume that when you say the word addiction, addict, alcoholic, whatever, that you are meant to be, or you should be in the gutter, you should be homeless, you should be jobless, you should have lost a relationship, you have a certain physical look about you. And I didn't fit that mold for a lot of people. So when I started putting those labels on myself, I got rejection over that. I had a lot of rejection of, you're not an alcoholic, you drink normal. So, regardless of where my drinking went, which we'll get to down the road if you haven't followed me already, I want to talk about where it began and how it started. And the title of this week's episode is Baby's First Beer, How Someone Becomes Addicted. And I want to talk about my first beer experience, then I'll backtrack. So the first beer that I ever drank in full, not the, mommy, can I have a sip of your wine, or can I taste it? I did that, not that my parents were any kind of alcoholics or anything like that. Everybody drank. And, occasionally I'd taste the beer and make a face and be like, ugh, because beer was gross. Wine was gross. Drinking alcohol as a kid or wanting to taste it, I think you do it out of intrigue and interest. Like, it's something that the adults have that you don't have. And depending on your experience, sometimes it has to do with the fact that the grown-ups are having fun when they drink this stuff, whatever it is. So why can't I try it and have fun too? The first real drink that I ever had was in 7th grade with my friend Debbie at her house. Her parents had gotten a divorce and her mother moved and went to California, leaving her with her father. And so there was no supervision, little to no supervision in that house not long after she left. He was an older father. I couldn't tell you how old he was. When you're a kid, everybody looks old. I would guess that when we were in our 12, 13 years of age, he was probably in his 50s, so he was an older father for her. He just, I don't think, knew how to handle taking care of a 12, 13-year-old girl. And he did the best he could, I believe, but what that meant was he left us alone a lot. And I don't mean like alone all day in the house, but he went to his job, he came home, he didn't bother us. He didn't spend a lot of time, engaging with her and I if I went and had sleepovers. And once the supervision backed off, and once we realized that house was a free-for-all, I was spending the night over there all the time because it was fun, and I have a lot of stories. But at any rate, my first story was her boyfriend and his brother came over and they brought some beer. They were a little bit older, and at the time the drinking age was 19. This was in the 80s, very early 80s. So it was far easier to have somebody who, quote unquote, looked older go buy beer. Nobody was carding people the way they do now, and the drinking age was younger. So they came over with some beer, and they brought out some Budweiser, and then they brought out a joint. So my first foray into all of the like illicit substances was all at one time. So I went from not having anything to drinking a beer and smoking a joint in the same night at 12 years old. And it wasn't like I got super drunk or super stoned or anything like that. It was just the fact that I tried it, didn't like the beer, never liked the beer as a kid. And let's just, call it what it is. I was a kid. I was a child. Never liked the beer, but I drank it because the other kids were drinking it, and that was what made you cool. I did that, and then I, took a few hits off the joint, and I think it was in my mind. I didn't really know how to behave. I don't remember that I, got super high. I remember feeling a bit lightheaded, and I started talking to this giant teddy bear that she had in the corner that she won at Six Flags. And then I also started talking to a shoe. Like one of the kids, I think it was her boyfriend, he had a pair of, this was like 81, 82. This was like 80, 81 actually. It was like wearing the big high top shoes where the tongues would hang out, like Kapas and Reeboks. And so I picked up the shoe and I put it to my ear and I was like, hello, Mr. Shoe, is anybody there? Oh, it's for you. And as stupid as that sounds, everybody laughed. And that was all I needed. So why was that so important to me? Because my self-esteem was shit. And so let's backtrack. So that was the experience. If you're watching, you're going to see that I'm going to pull my like stuffed animal pillow around because I'm more comfortable this way. And I'm perpetually 12 years old. I think maybe in some respects I got stuck in that phase of being at Debbie's house. Let me back up to my childhood a little bit. I grew up in Connecticut, in New Britain, which was at one time the tool capital of America, and let's call it a very waspy childhood. New Britain was full of European immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. They were all like Swedish, Irish, German. And I had, a full family, all my grandparents, lots of aunts and uncles, cousins. I mean, just huge family. And, we had kind of a Norman Rockwell type childhood. It was very idyllic. I had a very idyllic childhood. That does not mean it did not have its issues, but on the surface, it was very idyllic. My dad took us sledding on the snow in the winter, and then we went to the beach every summer, and it was very nice. It was a very nice childhood. I don't have any complaints. And when I was 11, my parents came in my room. I was reading a book, probably Judy Blume, and they said, we need to talk to you. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of serious for a sixth grader. And they said, we just want to let you know that your father got a new job and we're going to be moving to Texas. So that was a bit of a shock. And all I knew at the time about Texas was what I saw on TV in the show Dallas, because Dallas was pretty new. It was probably in its first year. Again, this was in 79. So I think the show had come out in 78, 79, something like that. So all I knew was Texas was all about oil, cowboys, cows, JR, cowboy hats, and the word y'all. That was my stereotype of Texas. And, to some respects, it's true. But there is much more to Texas than that. And so I was quite excited and a bit nervous. And one of the first things I asked was, what about Robin? Robin is my sister, if you have not followed me before. And she had already moved out of the house, although she was still quite young. She would have been 18 at that point, and we were very close. I was 11. Yeah, something like that, 10 or 11. And they said, well, Robin's going to stay here because my sister had already moved out and was living with a girlfriend. That's another story for another day. And so that was a bit traumatizing. My sister and I were very close. And even after she moved out, my parents would let me go to her house and have sleepovers and hang out with her. And we were extraordinarily close. So I was now moving away, not just from my school, my friends, the Girl Scouts, the sledding, the beach, grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, but I was moving away from my sister. And that was pretty traumatic. All right, so we move, fast forward, we move and we get to Texas. And then I enter school, which was already weird because in Texas, it was a bit different layout than Connecticut. Connecticut was middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Texas was junior high school, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I was in 6th grade, so that meant I had to go from middle school back to elementary school, and that was a bit weird to me. I also was in an open concept classroom, which I don't believe exist anymore, thank God, because they're horrendous if you have any kind of attention disorder. So it was literally like the entire grade is in one giant room, and they have accordion walls, so you can close it off, but for the most part, they didn't. So that was pretty awful. And I think it was the first or second day of school. This kid starts leaning over. His name was Jimmy. He starts leaning over and making all these faces at me and making all these noises and kind of making like these weird googly eyes at me and saying stuff like, hey, doofy, duh, hey, doofy. And he's like moving his eyes back and forth. What he was doing was he was making fun of me and he was making fun of my eyes. I had a lot of stuff going on with my vision. I was born cross-eyed. I'd had several corrective operations. They weren't corrected 100%, but so I had a bit of a head turn, and I could do a mean side eye, which I still can, but I had like the most epic side eye. It was almost like I invented the side eye. But he started making all these weird noises and gestures and whatnot at me, and it only took me a day or so to go, what the hell? This guy is making fun of me, and I had never experienced anything like that before. So in today's terms, that would be bullying. And it kind of rolled forward through him and a couple other kids. So I got really traumatized by that right off the bat. Matter of fact, I went home, and after I think a few days of it, I literally had a huge meltdown in the driveway with my mother, and it was horrible. Not to mention that around day 2 or 3, I was riding my bike after school, and I rode down the street. Who do I see, like 5 doors down, but this asshole kid standing in a front yard. And he stops me and he's like, what are you doing here? I said, well, we just moved down the street. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, I live here. Like, are you fucking kidding me? So this kid who's making all these stupid noises and faces at me lives on my street? Ugh. Anyway, so that was my first trauma. And then I get to middle school. And, and actually for the rest of the 6th grade, I'm not going to get deep into that whole story, but it eventually tapered off. I get into middle school, junior high school, and I met Debbie on the first day of school, and we became fast friends. So that was a positive. But during my 7th period English class, there's another guy very much just like Jimmy. And he starts doing kind of the same thing, making the same noises, same faces, stupid words, stupid names, and he starts making fun of me. And basically he starts bullying me. And my self-esteem at this point starts to go in the toilet. This is just the worst fucking time of your life because you are changing, your body's changing, your looks are changing, you're growing weird, your teeth are falling out if they haven't already. I had that issue too. I was super gangly. At this point, I was probably already 5'7" in sixth grade. So I was very tall. I had this crazy curly hair that had no direction at all. It was just this wacky curly hair. I was wearing glasses. I had the crazy side eye. And then I had huge buck teeth because my teeth came in late. So I still had baby teeth. And then I had like these two giant rabbit teeth at the front. I'll try to link a photo if I can find it to the show notes. But oh my God, it was horrible. And I just was not a pretty sight. And as much as I was hanging out with all my friends, but my self-esteem was shit. And again, going back to where I started with this, we left my family. And it wasn't until decades later that some therapist in my life was like, okay, so when you got to Texas, what did your parents do? And I'm like, well, they went to work. And they said, well, you do realize this is kind of a form of abandonment. Not that they abandoned you intentionally, but that is what your body and your mind and your psyche took it as. So I went from, having a big family and friends on the street and, everybody rallied around each other and my sister was always available to nobody. I had parents, but my dad was going off to a new job and my mother started working full time, which she had not done before. So I became a latchkey kid as well. So I was coming home from school and, coming home to an empty house. All right. I know I'm not alone. And let me just clarify, I'm not whining. It's not like, oh, the poor girl, she was a latchkey kid. Well, so was like, 3/4 of Generation X. So, but it's the bullying. It was the bullying and it was the shift and the culture change. All of it compiled into one big ugly basket was just horrendous. And then, getting to school and having a hard time making friends, it went on and on and on. And it started in sixth grade, it continued in seventh grade. And that was when, again, I had the first beer, I had the first joint. So that seed was planted. And, I wasn't as if I became a drunk. I didn't all of a sudden become some kind of like drunk kid, but I hung out with the people that got the beer. I hung out with the people that had the weed, even though I kept a preppy, good girl persona on the outside. So that Norman Rockwell girl from Connecticut still was on the surface, although she was gangly and she was kind of fugly. But I kept the persona on the outside. On the inside, I was doing everything in my power to try to be liked, to be popular. I was not popular. I was never popular. And I was never going to be popular, but I was desperate to at least try to get some positive reinforcement and positive attention from my peers. Because peer pressure is real. And let me just throw in here, I cannot freaking imagine how horrible it would be to be in school with social media and being on a smartphone all day. I just couldn't imagine it. And maybe that makes me sound like I'm old, but being, around and being in school without it was hard enough. So I can't even imagine feeling like I have to be this, under this pressure to keep up with everything that's going on TikTok and Reddit and Instagram. I'm not even going to say Facebook because that's an old people forum now, but those poor kids, and it's 24 hours a day. I can't even fucking imagine 24 hours a day that kids have access to bully you. I talked about this a couple weeks ago about adults and peer pressure, and how there are adults in life that still treat us like shit and still bully us at work and talk down to us. Can you imagine? And I'm sure some of you have kids or grandkids, depending on what age bracket's listening to this, or maybe it's you. I don't know. It could be that you are finding how hard it is, but I can't imagine. And then when I moved into ninth grade, I kind of had a reprieve in 8th grade. It stopped. And in 9th grade, it was the worst it could have ever been. I had a class, 4th grade Spanish, and it was full of mean girls. And, for time's sake, I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs in it, but those bitches were nasty. They were not nice at all. There were 3 of them. And then, of course, all it takes is a few to just kind of spark that. It's like it spreads like a cancer. Bullying tends to spread like a cancer. When everybody's doing stuff and they're laughing, the other kids also don't want to be subject to it. So they try to like quietly go along with it. Even if they don't say anything, they chuckle. And then the ones who feel bad for you will give you the empathetic look, but they're not going to open their mouths and get involved because they don't want the backlash. So that is where it all came from. That is where it all started. And so the perfect storm was the bullying happened year after year after year. And then at the same time, I entered a friendship, and I'm not blaming her or her dad or anything like that. It just was, it was all, like I said, it was a perfect storm. It was the right place, right time, where I got exposed and was able to go out and do all those like fun partying things. And we did. I mean, when I look back on it, it's mortifying when I think of having children and having stepchildren, which I do. And they're grown now, but my stepkids did nothing compared to what I did. And I wasn't a bad kid, but we did a lot of sneaking out. We did a lot of driving around and drinking with guys in muscle cars. And back when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, and we're hanging out with these 17, 18, 19-year-old guys, which is totally illegal. Probably was back then, but nobody thought twice about it. And like driving around with like guys with facial hair, drinking beer, and oh my God, it's so crazy now. And so what happened as I moved on into high school? I still had that same shitty self-esteem, and it just continued to roll forward. My looks started to get a little better. I'm not tooting my horn. I was far from any kind of, debutante, but my looks finally, I kind of grew into myself, I guess. I grew into the teeth, got the eyes fixed, kind of figured out what to do with the hair, got taller. I'm 5'10". I reached that in high school, 9th, 10th grade, but I kind of grew into myself. But that self-esteem, man, it never got better. Not fully. Even today, sometimes that stuff still sticks in your head. I think if you had any issues with self-esteem in your life, you can have all the therapy, you can have all of the rehab, you can go on all the retreats, you can do all the meditation, you can do all the things. But if you were affected like that by other human beings, I feel like it just embeds itself in your DNA. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just feel like it's something that sticks with you for life. I am confident in who I am, and I do feel much better about myself, but that's always in the back of the head. And it doesn't take much for somebody to say a shitty word or to make a backhanded comment to kind of go, and you immediately start going, duh, doofy. It sounds terrible and it sounds stupid and immature maybe, but that's just where it came from. So that is how I started drinking. I started experimenting with drugs. It was all about acceptance. It was all about self-esteem and trying to be accepted by my peers. When I got into high school, it really wasn't any different, although I didn't get bullied anymore, but I still had that really low self-esteem. I made new groups of friends, but I knew that there were comments being made kind of in the background. And like I said, you still feel it. And that's the time that I was in high school band. So football games are happening and you got the whole Friday Night Lights thing. So there was a lot of drinking after the games. And again, the drinking age was still quite young. It changed while I was in high school to 21, so it became a little more difficult, but there was always drinking going on. There was always beer, there was always alcohol. Oh my gosh, there were wine coolers galore. We started with California coolers, we moved to Bartles and James and Seagram's, and then moving into trash can punch and Everclear, and ugh. And it all boiled down to self-esteem. And again, this went from high school, this went into college. I mean, I could go on and on and on. By the time I got out of my college years, and I didn't graduate from college, I went to Texas Tech for 1 year, and all I did was party there. I spent a lot of time hanging out at one particular frat house, which was horrible. It was a horrible, horrible thing for me to do as a girl with self-esteem issues. If I could change anything, I'm not saying I didn't have fun, but if I could change anything, I wouldn't go back to that shit. I really wouldn't. Once I left that environment, it was the best thing I ever could have done, was just getting away from that, like, weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend at the same place, same place, same place, same place, like hanging out with all the wrong people. And as I moved into my 20s, I still continued to party. I still continued to drink. This went on for years and years and years. My self-esteem got better, but that drinking was always there, that drinking and trying the drugs. And, luckily I didn't do a lot of drugs. I did enough to experiment with them, but I also did enough to go, I don't need to be involved with this anymore. So that is basically how an addict, in my case, that's how my addiction was born. My addiction was 100% born out of low self-esteem. It wasn't like I was abused. The trauma that I talk about was the move. And that's even when I write about it. And I'm actually working on my memoir talking about drinking. And I titled that chapter, The Move. And that was like the big dreaded move. I was talking not long ago to my dad about it. And he's like, what was I supposed to do? We were trying to do what was best for the family. And I told him, I said, I don't have any resentment towards you guys for moving. I'm just letting you know it was very difficult on me. He said, oh, no, I know you had a hard time. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, you have no idea. But, again, you don't have to move across country to have a shitty experience in school. And I guess where's my message? What's my message here today? My message is, if you are listening as a parent or grandparent, pay attention to your kids. My parents had no clue this was going on. And it wasn't because they didn't pay attention to me. It's because I was going off to spend the weekends with my friends. And I had friends that I spent the weekends with and did sleepovers with that we did none of those things, where we did appropriate 12 and 13, 14-year-old things. We sat and played Atari, and we went out and hung out in the street riding our bikes and did stuff like that. It was really at this one house, but the house presented well. They knew the parents. They had met the parents a couple times. Obviously, they knew there was a divorce, but they just assumed everything was still status quo. There was no reason for them to believe anything else. There was no reason for them to believe that anything was different, because also we were sneaking out, or we were sneaking people in. And her dad was on the other side of the house. And once he went to bed, we literally would walk out the front door after, 11 o'clock at night, and he would never have a clue we were even gone. And we'd be back before he got up the next morning. So I know that I'm not alone in this type of story. And I know this is not just my generation. And again, it's not just about abuse or serious trauma in a household. It can be a very small thing that sparks somebody to reach for something to make them feel better. That's really the basics of it. I did what I did because it made me feel better. And it wasn't so much that it made me feel better physically, although there was liquid courage once I got to a certain level in an evening, where I would obviously do things that I wouldn't have done if I was sober. It was mostly about the mental and emotional acceptance. It was about feeling good about myself mentally, emotionally, feeling like other people accepted me, other people liked me, because of the person that I was when I drank, or because of the person that I was when I smoked, or because I actually just joined in and did what they were doing and didn't say, no, I don't want to do that, because it would make me an outcast. And it is weird, because when I look back, I think, shit, Was it fun? It was fun at the time, and there were some really terrifying moments. I am not glamorizing it at all, because there were situations where I should be dead. There are situations where I should have been sexually assaulted because I was put in really compromising positions, or I put myself in really compromising positions. In the midst of that, did I have some fun? Yeah, I might have had some fun. Anyway, all right, I'm going to wrap it up there. So I would love to hear your comments. If you would comment below, if you had any kind of similar experience, like, did you start drinking when you were young? Why did you start drinking when you were young? Did it start because you drank as a kid and it just continued to roll forward? Or is it because you had a traumatic event in your life? I'm very curious to know some of the stories out there, and, let's just open this dialogue and kind of see where we go from here. All right, so thank you for listening to my babbling. If I stumbled a bit, it's because I'm not scripted and I don't have a notebook sitting in front of me. I just have my little fluffy pillow here. And I hope to do a few more like this where I can just speak freely, and hopefully we can just open this conversation. As I always say, we're all in this together, so we need to support one another. So you guys have a fantastic week, and as always, stay safe, stay sober. Just a quick note of the legal jargon. I am not a medical or psychiatric professional, nor am I a recovery or addiction specialist. This podcast is for information use only, and I am simply sharing my own experiences with sobriety, drinking, mental health, and wellness. I'm not here to diagnose or to treat. So if you're struggling and you feel like you are in immediate need, please contact a medical professional or call 911. Thank you guys again. Stay safe, stay sober.